Hi, this is Mr. Smith with the 10th week of US in the World. This week, of course, we have a 3-day week, and next week is a 3-day week. So actually, both of these weeks, this calendar week and next, will be part of unit number 7, which will be on the fourth quarter. So for the bell ringer, what do you know about the United States during the 1950s? And this also relates to the journal, where you will basically get the same question and answer in 3 to 5 sentences, and then complete the USW 7 reading, and we'll go over Korea in the notes today. So looking at each one of those things, first of all, don't forget you can go to the chat to enter in what you think about the 1950s. You can see there's already quite a few people have answered there. And then the journal. See what do you know about the 1950s. So click submit. Answer the question, 3 to 5 sentences, and please proofread and then submit again. And then the reading, if you click on the link here, make sure that you click make a copy, and this will open up. You have each of the web pages. This time you only have to do 4 significant points and 1 interpretation, since there's a few more pages. And if you click on each of these links, it will take you to the web page that you need to read. For instance, this one is on the Korean War. So there you'd find 4 significant items to enter and 1 interpretation on the right-hand side. Same with each of these others. Then you can see the notes. And so if you click on the file here, you'll see a copy of the notes document open up. You can see you'll put these significant points on the right, interpretations on the left, and this would be for the first topic, which is about the Korean War. So let's look at that. So this would be the Unit 7 notes in 1950s. First of all, the Korean War is known as the Forgotten War. World War II is known by most people because of their heroic efforts to stop fascism in both the European theater and Pacific theaters, involving many different countries, an all-out effort to stop evil. And then Vietnam was this long, struggling war that was popular at first, but then resistance started to grow and became controversial. And this war in between, though, isn't really talked about a lot. It's called the Forgotten War. And it really started because of World War II. One of the first steps that Japan did that eventually led to World War II was taking territories, especially the ones marked in orange. It started with Korea and then went on to parts of China, Southeast Asia, and then the Philippines, of course, when it attacked the United States. The war was specifically going to look at their influence on the peninsula of Japan. So Japan ruled, of course, this territory for actually a number of decades and used it as a colony, take natural resources and use human labor. During World War II, Japanese troops in Korea eventually surrendered to the United States and the Soviet Union, and we agreed to divide the country along the 38th line of latitude. And we thought, of course, after the war, the North would be the pro-communist side and the South would be the democracy, the non-communist side. They'll eventually hold elections. And so because of that, we can just both leave. And that's what we decided to do in 1949. So we divided it. It isn't quite so even in the way it looks like in this line, but we would divide it along the 38th line of latitude. However, there's a deep wish amongst many Koreans for the peninsula to be united, because a long time ago, in pre-World War II times, or pre-20th century times, I guess I should say, it was a kingdom unto itself with its own culture and language, separate from Japan and China. So North Korea, the communist country, decided they wanted to reunite, so they invaded South Korea in June of 1950. This, of course, alarmed Harry Truman, who was president of the United States, because he saw it as a territorial conquest that Hitler and Japan had operated on in the previous war. And so he ordered our Navy and our Air Force to support South Korea. And in the meantime, he sent our State Department, which takes care of foreign matters, to the United Nations to adopt a resolution to help South Korea. Um, we actually, at this time, because we didn't want to recognize Communist China, the nationalists had fled to the small island of Taiwan, and so we wanted the nationalists to have China's vote in the United Nations. The Soviet Union pointed out, well, that can't be. There's hundreds of millions of people in China that are represented by the Communist Party. They should get the vote. And so the USSR was actually boycotting participation in the United Nations at that time. And so they weren't around to block when we passed a resolution supporting South Korea. So the UN forces would consist of many different countries, 16 and over 500,000 troops. 90%, of course, were American. And then there was a considerable amount of South Korean troops as well. And the most significant general that was part of the Pacific Theater also was Douglas MacArthur. And so before we could get there to offer more assistance and troops, the North Korean forces had gone almost all the way to this territory known as Pusan. And so this was the last stronghold of the South Koreans. And so for 2 months, they had driven far south. And so MacArthur needed to find a way to alleviate the entire peninsula from the North Koreans. So MacArthur would lead an amphibious assault that would end up kind of surrounding and sandwiching the North Korean forces. And here you can see from Pusan, he would have an army proceed northward and also another one proceed to the southwest and eventually swing around to northeast, landing at Incheon Bay, so that way the North Korean forces would be surrounded. And that's exactly what happened. But then MacArthur continued to push northward toward the Chinese border along the Yalu River. China became concerned, though. They warned them, don't approach the border. You need to go back down to the 38th parallel. So when UN forces pushed north almost to the Yalu River, 300,000 Chinese troops then swarmed across the border to assist the North Koreans. And so the United States was pushed back south to the 38th parallel. And you can see here the Chinese propaganda was portraying this as rodents. And to end the war and to eliminate the Chinese involvement, he proposed that we should surround the coast of China to put in a trade blockade, basically, and to use atomic weapons on China. They had huge armies, massive amounts of people due to their high population, so he thought using nuclear weapons was necessary. But of course, Truman thought this was going overboard and believed it would start World War III, so he insisted that we stop at the 38th parallel. And so we ended up basically freezing around this border here. And MacArthur, of course, made his displeasure with Truman's decisions publicly known, complaining to numerous people. He even wrote a letter to the House of Representatives basically complaining about Truman's strategy. And he forgot, of course, that the president is the commander-in-chief and in charge. And so because of this activity on the signs basically trying to encourage people to ignore Truman or think Truman was wrong, Truman had no choice but to fire Douglas MacArthur. And from 51 to 53, much fighting took place, but little territorial changes happened. And so Eisenhower, when he ran for office in 1952, promised, of course, to resolve the situation. And so eventually an armistice was signed, not an actual peace treaty, though. The terms included that the combat would stop, that prisoners of war or POWs would be exchanged between the two sides, and there would be a demilitarized zone, kind of an imaginary border there along the 38th parallel where 2.4 miles gap would exist between the two sides. We eventually did put some troops on opposite sides of the demilitarized zone. It's a no man's land littered with mines, for instance, to keep a extra wide border in between the two parts, North and South Korea. So there have been over 35,000 U.S. deaths and cost tens of billions of dollars. And it also increased and provided evidence to some people, look, the communists will continue to try to expand, not realizing it was more about Korean unity. Communism was contained, though, without the use of an atomic bomb. And of course, we still have a large amount of forces there, and North Korea has a large amount of forces along the demilitarized zone. And technically, the two sides, North and South Korea, are still in a state of war since they didn't sign an actual peace treaty. And there you can see some pictures of the demilitarized zone. This is one of the entranceways. And of course, North Koreans conduct nuclear weapons tests and eventually develop weapons. This is a picture of one of their members of their dictator family, the Kim family, KIM. And of course, the North Koreans have a number of nuclear facilities where they can possibly develop more nuclear weapons, which is really concerning to South Korea and Japan in particular. And they also use an enormous amount of propaganda to teach that the United States is the one that's evil and that they could easily defeat us. But of course, when they put all that money into the military, which they do, they don't have a lot left. And so there's massive amounts of malnutrition and disease that take place amongst the North Korean people. So in the next part of the notes, we will talk about Eisenhower. And so for the remainder of the day, please make sure that you complete the first journal and the reading.